Good morning, metalheads of the internet, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Metal Meltdown. Today we are talking about the latest studio album from Evile entitled The Unknown. This is the sixth full-length studio album from this English thrash metal crew, their second, with Old Drake on lead vocals and on lead guitar, also their second since finally getting their shit together. Some of you may remember Evile back in the late 2000s, early 2010s being at the forefront of the thrash metal resurgence and revival alongside bands such as Municipal Waste, Toxic Holocaust, Havoc. I remember way back in the day, basically when I was in high school, first year of college, I had a few buddies living in Brampton, Ontario, who just fucking loved Evile. Anytime I went down there to visit them, we were basically listening to Enter the Grave and Infected Nations on repeat. I don't really blame them in retrospect. They're both great records. They're probably some of the most blatant Metallica worship you'll ever find, but fuck it, it was still great. I've since enjoyed their other records like Five Serpents' Teeth, Skull, 2021's Hell Unleashed, which we reviewed here on the Metal Meltdown just over 2 years ago. And I remember in that review saying something to the effect of, Evile doesn't need to change, I don't want them to change, they're so good at playing this kind of classic 80s Metallica type thrash metal that there's just no need for them to change. Clearly Evile disagrees to some extent because The Unknown is probably the most different sounding that Evile has ever been since their inception. There is still a lot of Metallica worship on display here, but whereas with previous albums that was filtered through a love of records like Kill 'Em All and Ride the Lightning, now it feels like we're entering the band's Black Album Load and Reload worship era phase. The songs are slower, moodier, darker, more evocative, even in some instances. On top of mid-90s Metallica, I'm also reminded of mid-90s Anthrax and early Machine Head and Black Label Society. And whilst I appreciate Evile for finally kind of stepping outside the comfort zone, I'm not convinced that this works, and it just kind of reaffirms what I had already thought about Overkill and what I had already said about them back in the aforementioned Hell Unleashed review. Don't get me wrong, I love it when bands experiments. I always want to encourage musicians and producers and writers to let their freak flag fly and just go absolutely fucking bonkers. But again, this is one of those rare instances where, maybe they should have just stuck to what they already knew, or at the very least, maybe it should have been approached a different way, because it's just not working for me on this album. The opening number and title track, The Unknown, for instance, is an incredibly unintuitive and lethargic kind of mid-pace, hard rock 90s groove metal number. Some of the most one-dimensional riffage I think I've heard on any metal record so far this year. It has no momentum to it. It has no urgency to it. It frankly just kind of plods along, never once progressing, never once evolving, never once changing course. And honestly, even on my very first playthrough of this record, I found myself pretty much skipping over this track. It frankly just bored me. Following track, The Mask We Wear, is a bit of a step up in my opinion. It's angsty and edgy, but it does have some nice bulky grooves and some wah pedal-drenched guitar madness. I also find myself briefly enjoying When Mortal Coils Shed. It's a nice, sobering, evocative ballad with some more introspective shades that I'm not used to seeing from Evile. These two tracks specifically, though, more so than anything else on the album, are so derivative of Black Album era Metallica that it's not even up for debate, though. When Mortal Coils Shed specifically sounds so much like Nothing Else Matters that it wouldn't shock me if somebody played this for Metallica and James or Lars or Kirk or whomever went, holy fuck, is that our song? Is that our song? I don't remember it sounding like that. What the fuck? Of all of the tracks on this album that specifically go down this route that we've talked about thus far, I would say that Beginning of the End is the most successful. It's the most cohesive, it's the most urgent, it's the most powerful, it has the most weight behind it, and it also has the most catharsis. I like a lot of those twin guitar harmonies. I like the way that vocals kind of soar over top these chunky grooves, almost giving it a weird kind of unintentional epic doom underbelly. I like the double bass in the very end, kind of bringing this to a heftier and more extreme finish. At Mirror's speech honestly isn't too bad either. The angsty alt-metal-esque vocal dynamics combined with those metallic rhythmic outbursts and groovy barrages almost kind of feels like something that I would expect Life of Agony and Alice in Chains to make if they were somehow fused together into one being. Unsurprisingly, though, it's only when Evile makes a full-blown return to thrash metal on tracks like Out of Sight and Sleepless Eyes that everything suddenly, finally, truly clicks for me. Are these songs on par with anything I might have heard back in the day on Enter the Grave or Infected Nations? No, but they do everything I expect a good thrash metal number to do. They're short, they're punchy, visceral, heavy, and nasty as fuck. They don't waste any fucking time, no fat, no filler. They just do their fucking thing, and then they go the fuck home. I will say, though, putting both of these songs in the very middle of this album was a big mistake. This album doesn't really have a great flow or feel to it, and spreading these out, even across a couple of other tracks, I think that would have made a huge difference. One more thing, I'm just not really feeling Old Drake's vocals on this one at all. Half the time, it's either a full-blown imitation of early 90s James Hetfield, or he's just sounding really uncomfortable or unsure of himself. To the point where there are a lot of visible fuck-ups and pitch issues across this album. The kind of stuff that, frankly, could have been resolved quick with the help of a good producer and a vocal coach, which also gives me the impression that this record was rushed on some level. I'm feeling a 2.5 out of 5 on this one. It's okay. I respect Evile for kind of, sort of, trying something new. Cool, yippee, good for them. But ultimately, I don't feel that it really worked out. The album is kind of all over the place. It lacks urgency. It lacks consistency. I've got a funny feeling that Evile fans and the larger thrash metal community are going to be pretty divided on this thing. I'm not really sure how this thing is going to be received. Only time will tell, but I do hope for Evile's sake this is perceived as being a bit of a success. I do hope that my review is one of the more negative ones out there, because, I wouldn't object to hearing Evile try this again and really try to refine it and try to add their own spin on this. Like, ideally, we can look back at this as a weird transitional album. You know what I mean? Kind of like when Sepultura transitioned from, thrash metal to, nu metal, groove metal, You had Arise, which is awesome, Chaos ID, which in my opinion is meh, and then Roots, which is awesome, Maybe this is Evile's Chaos AD. Although with that in mind, a lot of people love Chaos ID, so, whatever. What the fuck do I know? Whatever. Look, the point is, it's okay. Would I prefer Evile have just done straight-up thrash metal? Probably, but props for kind of trying something new. We'll see where this goes in the future, I guess. Yeah. Whatever. 2.5 out of 5. Yeah. And that is it for the Metal Meltdown. I'm not an expert, nor do I claim to be. So what do you think? Do you like this record? Do you not like this record? And what do you want to hear from me next? And thank you for watching. Make sure you press subscribe right here so you get updates on the Metal Meltdown fucking immediately. And as always, you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.